it's now open. You can choose whichever. I think some people were told that they couldn't go to one because there wasn't room in there was not enough space in each room. But now you can choose. So so you've seen the subject matters: material passports, circular procurement, what's after digitalization, tourism and construction, and making circular building assessment common practice. So you are free just to choose, and we will have people outside who will be leading you to those rooms after the coffee break, so you'll be able to see where they all are. So if you already want to be thinking about where you want to go and maybe changing your mind on the one that you have registered with, that is absolutely fine. So that's a little bit later on. But now, this morning we were very much concentrating on what's happening in Europe with the BAMB project, and now we want to expand much further afield and see what is happening elsewhere in the world. And obviously this event is co-hosted by the One Planet Network, and we heard this morning that they have 3 global programs: building, procurement and tourism, where they're really very, very busy in the whole issue of the circular economy. And there's huge scope for partnership between BAM and the One Planet Network, and we want to explore that a little bit in this session. I want to introduce our 3 speakers who are waiting here very patiently, and then we will have a quick Slido question before they start their presentations. In the center here we have Pekka Hovila, who is the coordinator of the One Planet Network Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program. We've already met Pekka this morning, but just to remind you, or for anyone who wasn't here this morning. Then we have Kuno van Geest, who is a member of the Sustainable Public Procurement Program of the One Planet Network, and Dirk Glesser, who leads the Sustainable Tourism Program. And we will be joined also by Caroline Enroté from BAM to discuss a little later. But these 3 gentlemen, would you like to take a seat while we just do this? Well, I was just going to do the Slido question first of all. Let's have a look. It's just to get a sort of sense of on what level you think that the circular economy functions best. What level of administration is most important when promoting the circular economy in the built environment? Is it a local or regional level? Is it national level, or is it international level? And this feeds very nicely, obviously, into the conversation that we're having now. But do you think it's better to be done on a small, local level, on a national level, or international? So 44% on a local or regional, 27% international, 50. So basically, local or regional wins out. Well, we'll see what our speakers have got to say about that. I mean, what's your first reaction to that, Pekka?
Well, immediately, I think all levels are important, and they have a different roles. I'm happy to see that this local level has been emphasized. At the same time, at the national level, the policies has to be developed, and of course, there's the international dimension there.
Okay, well, we'll explore that a little bit later in our discussion. So, now the 3 of you are going to outline your vision for the circular economy in your particular program. So, Pekka, you will start with the built environment. We'll have Kuno in procurement policies, and Dirk from a tourism perspective. So, if you'd like to go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. Maybe to precise also that I do this coordination for the Ministry of the Environment from Finland, who is leading our program. But the 6 programs, to those of you who missed the morning session, they are the ones. And all of us, I think these numbers are a bit outdated. We have 700 partners and 140 national focal points. So we are quite well covering the globe. And our mandate is mentioned in Agenda 2030. We are the implementing platform for sustainable consumption and production. In addition to that, our strategy focuses on developing tools, also leading in implementation and demonstrating the impacts. That's what all the 6 programs are doing, and all 6 programs also have a strong component in the built environment. And quite often when we talk about the built environment, it's like a negative things, 30% of the emissions out of 40% of energy use. But the good news is that actually the energy efficiency investments are increasing quite considerably, like by more than 10% per year. Other thing is waste. We have discussed here in Europe even higher than globally, but we are using even the waste of other industries in the building sector, and we are taking better care of our own waste. The sector is important from the employment point of view. 10% of the people are working in buildings, and especially for us, working also in developing countries, it's interesting to notice that the clean technologies provide jobs for the youth, for all genders, and that is also growing globally. And the World Economic Forum has estimated that the construction industry productivity could be increased by at least $100 billion a year. That's their figures on circularity, if the circular economy principles are applied. In our program in buildings, we are mainly, let's say, framed by the international frameworks on Paris Climate Agreement, Agenda 2030, on the SDGs, where it's not only number 12 on consumption and production, we also contribute to providing healthy indoor and outdoor conditions. We look at the resource efficiency, innovation, and also land use, and provide education for different people. The third international agreement deals with the New Urban Agenda by UN Habitat, and that explicitly mentions circular economy as one of the tools. So I start with this and hand it over to Kuno to explain how the procurements are approaching this circularity.
Thank you. So I'm Kuno van Geet from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Still have to get used to the name because it used to be the environment. We still deal about the environment, but it's no longer in the name. We are a member of the SPP program of the UNEP. And the reason actually is the question you asked. What is the most important aspect of circularity? Is that local, regional, or international? In my perspective, we focus too much on local and regional. Of course, construction is local and regional. But what we need is to work with global companies who have global change. And if you want to change that, you need a global perspective. Not for everything, because all the sand and the cement is coming from the Netherlands, but for example in the Netherlands. So what does the program do? It's taking two steps. The first one, and then we still do, is the most important one, is raise awareness about the demand side. If you want to change the market, no matter how many businesses can provide it, if no one asks for it, it doesn't happen. So raising this awareness throughout the globe is, I think, the main issue, and we need to keep on doing that. So that's been the program so far, and that's where we also develop guidance and tools for procurers who don't know a lot about this technology that you know a lot about, I think. So the next step is now also how do we relate it to the sector approaches. That's a challenge because this is high up at the UN level, and how do you relate it to a procurer on the ground? What we try to do is try to build partnerships or a sector-based approach in some areas to see how we can actually make a step further from just raising awareness. This is a strategy that's still under construction, so we hope to get more information on this as well. And there's one where we try to collaborate with the SPC program. So that's for now, I think. Let me see the second. Yeah, I just want to mention this again. Why is it so important? It's not moving, it should be moving. So actually, Europe has 1.8 billion of procurement power. And this is just to address again, without demand and using this, this is public procurement only. Actually, the United States calculated that including private procurement, you can actually reach out to the market in 67% of everything you buy. Just to show how important it is. This is for tourism, so I'll hand over to, I've got your name.
Thank you. My name is Dirk Lissa. I'm with the World Tourism Organization. The organization took the lead together with the governments of Morocco, France, and Korea. We are engaging on the sustainable tourism program of the One Planet Network. My question now to you, how many traveled here today from outside of Brussels? Quite a number of hands. How many of you are not going in 2018 on holidays. 2 out of this crowd. In 2017, we counted for 1.3 billion international tourist arrivals worldwide. Anybody here in the room now knows how many people traveled 1950s? 1950s. 68 years ago. 25 million people internationally. That has changed over the past 70 years. A world on the move. Here are some of the implications. So far, tourism was basically an instrument for development of economic growth. It multiplied into societies. It helped emerging countries to reach development. They opted for tourism. But there's more to tourism. Tourism, on one hand, is a human need. It is a way of self-fulfillment. People are traveling because they are looking for something. In the past, it was mainly a tool for physical recreation. That is no longer the fact nowadays. People are in search of something. And I point out that because there's a huge potential link to that, and that is the reason why we're here. We see on one hand economic growth, we see the opportunities, we see at the same time enormous use of resources, and we see the need to facilitate travel and tourism in the future. What we here have analyzed was where tourism policies are anchored at the national level. We analyzed that across membership globally, and we found that over the years it has changed. Here to the left, you see national tourism administrations being responsible only to tourism. That has increased to when we analyzed that the last time in 2017. So there were more ministry, more full cabinet representation, more policy makers just focusing on tourism in countries. But we saw also an increase in those ministries with a mixed portfolio. So in policy terms, it grew also in its importance. However, and that is the slide here, if we look at the thematic areas in the national tourism plans where sustainability has to be addressed, we saw that resource efficiency still lags significantly behind, and that there is a need to prioritize that so that we decouple the growth of tourism from the use of resources. And Becca said so this morning, that is what brings us together, circularity. The option, the necessity to think through the One Planet Network, through the partners we have there in a different manner.
So now all three of you are going to sort of get a sense of how you managed to spread the word, disseminate ideas, and we talked about the need to raise awareness. How do you do it?
A bit about the modus operandi. In this map you see by green our coordination desk, by blue colors the multi-stakeholder advisory group members, and by yellow the partners. So this is our network, and we are also working with other networks, like with other programs, and also some examples of the projects we are running there in different countries. In the circular economy, we have defined now regional nodal points with whom we try to, let's say, get hold on this big picture. In Europe, it's together with Netherlands and Finland. In Asia, we have a very strong actor there in India, in Southern Pacific, Australia, also Africa, in the LAC region, both in South America and Central America. So we have a group of, let's say, nodal points that are building up their networks and collecting data. And we're looking at the circularity during the whole life cycle, not only waste at the end of the process, but also at the starting point. And to give some examples, like I picked from India, this case, our partners there have been able to find solutions that replace 50% of the clinker and then reducing the emission by 30% in cement production. Also using the waste, so 90%, a bit like said earlier, can be reduced and do considerable savings. And using the, let's say, slug-based materials as an example. And the interesting thing here is that this organization, Development Alternatives, based in India, has also developed business models for startup companies, so people can start up their industries in different scales in order to make these things, let's say, mainstream. But what we are doing in the Buildings program, we are compiling now case studies around the world, what has been done in circularity in the environment. We are setting up expert database so that we can engage in our implementation project, and we intend to do a global report on the matters. And we collaborate with our, let's say, sister programs here, and we are very happy to engage you also in this work. We also work in Europe. It's not only in developing countries, but we want to cover the map globally. And over to you, Kuno, to continue.
Thank you. So how do we do that in procurement? Well, I'm not to talk about the UN because I'm not the UN, but we work with them because we think it's very important to share. We have a session afterwards where we show some practice on the ground, and we need to share that kind of knowledge. And it's important that this knowledge is covered throughout the world. We have a lot of partners. Of course, the sharing of knowledge is, it's a kind of active in Europe, because we are based in Europe. It's easier to travel in Europe. So we have a big group in Europe of more pioneers who are working with each other to develop also new knowledge. And we try to share that again. Other regions are also the United States who are working on this. And there's also with ICLAI some kind of groups, the Procura Plus, which is in Europe, but also in Asia, for example. And there are other groups. And there you have the connection through other NGOs. Also here is, I think, ACR Plus is doing it in Europe as well. So that's very important. The biggest challenge for us is to make mass and not just sharing the PDFs online, but also to get actions. And we actually have trainings that can be given. So that is something where we want to move forward and see how we can work with people to transfer the knowledge even faster than we're doing right now. To see this online, you have the clearinghouse, and there's also a website from ICLAI if you want, where you have a resource. There's a lot of brochures and things to read. And actually, if you join this network, there are also training modules, or you can contact people who know about it, and they might help out. So I think that's the major thing. And then we go to the tourism.
Thank you very much. Becca mentioned before to you that the One Planet Network is consisting of many partners. That is something which was facilitated. Cecilia, thank you for being today with us through UN Environment. At the beginning, it was expanded by the individual programs, then even further. We in the tourism program right now are actively interacting with 150 other partners, and they are multiplying even further. That is the purpose. And I will give you one example, so that you understand what we are aiming for. Creating tipping points. On one hand, being solid, advancing our knowledge, but creating tipping points. And the best analogy I can give you is the fashion industry. The fashion industry is able twice a year to change the trends, to change towards consumers and the way how things are manufactured, the trends. What we are after is creating tipping points through real evidence-based experiences, injecting over there our findings the best way possible. Solid work combined with this vision helps us to push for the necessary decoupling which we need. Here you see the distribution of our network, the facts, many NGOs, but a strong private sector component in the case of the tourism sector. It's the private sector, the tour operators, the service providers, the hotels. And that brings us exactly to the element where we see the strong link with construction. We heavily depend in tourism development on constructions, on new constructions, on remodeling of existing construction, where we right now partner on the thinking of circularity. Here you see the portfolio of work of our partners. Naturally, we document that. Naturally, we are going into webinars together with the construction and building sector and other sectors, other elements of the 10 YFP, One Planet Network, we have done several webinars to spread the word. Here you see what our partners are doing. To the left hand, you see an extraordinary case of a hotel in Cape Verde, which is carbon neutral, which innovated around circular economy. To the right-hand side, you see our focus on destinations, a very strong focus. There's where change in our world is very often happening for the first time, because here you experience the actions of local governments, whether they are managing tourism development to the satisfaction of the local population. There's where circular economic thinking and tourism sustainable management come together, in the place, in the destination, where people vote for local governments, whether their policies were right and implemented the right way. We have here, as a teaser for our session, after this, as a breakout session, two wonderful examples, one coming from a hotel, Hubert from Better Fly, and to the right-hand side, we see the Olympic Games in London, and Catherine is with us as well. Thank you for sharing later on the experiences in these two worlds of high importance and relevance for us in the tourism sector. Here, just so that you see, we are not looking only down, as mentioned before, we look also at the global level. Together with the construction sector, thank you very much. We organized the site event during the high-level political forum. This is where the SDG review process is taking place, where the voluntary national reviews are presented. And here we jointly presented, with the support of the One Planet Network and UN Environment, we presented what are the synergies, the possibilities for tourism and construction. And let me advance. That's how I prepared already the intervention. Tourism, if well managed, and I stress that, if well managed, has the potential to act as an agent of positive change. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll explore that a little bit more, but I'd like to invite Caroline Enroté from BAMB Project Coordinator, to join us so that we can get this sort of sense of where we see the potential for partnership as we carry on. So when we heard everything that BAMB was doing this morning, Caroline, where do you see the potential for scaling this up when you hear what's happening at sort of a global level?
Well, sorry, we're living in a very globalized world, and the issues that BAMB is tackling are also issues that we can see worldwide. Pekka was talking about what's happening in India, when in India 720 million tons of waste are produced yearly, compared to Europe, which is 860 million tons of waste. And so actually the issues are the same, even if it's really important to build and design buildings that are adapted to the local context, and we also see that the results of the inefficient use of resources, so example, climate change, but also biodiversity loss, loss of ecosystems, they're all over the world, and most of the time even affecting some regions that are not in Europe, much more than Europe. So there is a big issue there that is really global, and on the other hand, we also see that, well, at this moment, I think that 50% of the world population is living in cities, which by 2050 will be 70%. And when we take into account the population growth, well, approximately 50% of the buildings that will be existing then still have to be built. So this means that we have a huge opportunity, but also a huge responsibility to do things differently. Because, well, we have been making some errors, design errors, till now, which are resulting to a lot of waste and a lot of uses in resources. And it's really important to change that now with the transition towards circular economy. And I think that the BAMB tools can really support that. When we look, for example, at the reversible building design tools, well, the criteria that are used there can be used for any type of design, looking at connections, looking at hierarchy between different elements. And of course, the results that will be designed will be different. The same is true for data and for decision-making models. There is a need for decision-making models for data, And of course, we'll have to adapt the tools to the local context, taking into account the building typologies, different types of materials. But looking at the tool that we've been developing, well, the concept, the strategies, and the core elements can be implemented and upscaled worldwide.
Thank you. If you have any questions, please send them. I wonder whether the team, Cedric, and could empty out all the questions from the earlier session, because I'm only seeing the sessions from this morning. But do please send your questions. Can I then ask from the One Planet Network? You heard everything that BAM had to say this morning, and you hear from Caroline that obviously the issues are the same worldwide. But where do you see potential then for synergies, for partnership, for really on a practical level, how you can really make use of and work together? I don't know who wants to take that to begin with.
I found one slide, taking now the lead. I found one slide quite illuminating this morning when it was asked, where do you see is the decision-making taking place? And the answer then was, well, at many different places. And I would translate that into the question of where do we have the entry point? Because the belief is there, the concept is there, but where do we start talking and injecting that so that we multiply relevantly? And this is what is our interest as a tourism sector, to talk to the construction and building sector, because we do believe there is a very important entry point to advance the circularity, to demonstrate it works, to demonstrate it in such a manner that the consumer, the practitioner, understands it and translates it ultimately into proper own action, and not only points at somebody else. The important thing is to feel it, to feel that it is attractive, and I just remind you of what 5-10 years still was a very important argument when it came to, shall we opt for more sustainability? It was the argument the cost is higher. And most of the projects then conducted were successful when they reduced costs. But right now we are moving ahead, I think, significantly has changed that in society, still not sufficiently enough, but one must feel sustainability. One must feel that as attractive. And here is the discussion of where do we create, through construction, through buildings, experiences which are stimulating.
So you said that the tourist sector could be an agent of change. And we're talking about circularity of buildings. So, I mean, I know you're going to go into more detail this afternoon, but I mean, give us a sort of an example of that, of how if we're talking about circularity in building, how that links in with tourism.
It's the way how you experience it, and I translate it maybe to a practical example where it happened already. Museums. Museums, in classical terms, were places where somebody had an exposition and made you read to educate you, to transport a story. But it was not really designed in such a manner that you said it is entertaining. And you have seen museums, successful museums, changing over the recent past. They took elements from amusement parks. They took places which actually made money out of experiences. And who is better prepared than a designer, than an architect, to do that right now through buildings and transmit stories, experiences to the consumer, for which he is not only just recovering the cost, but sees that as a premium, an added value, and then we have reached the tipping point.
So, Gunnar, sorry, you wanted to come in. I mean, I want to ask both of you, really, your learnings, if you like, from this morning, and where you see the potential for partnership.
Yeah, I was just going to add, because indeed, on the partnerships and decision-making, I think procurement is an essential issue where we see a missing link currently. Procurement is somewhere down in the cellar sometimes as an administrative work. It should be up to the level of strategic and decision-making. And sometimes right now we have started bottom-up. We have examples how we can do it. That needs to be explored further, but we also need to connect decision-makers to actually commit to this cause. And that's a challenge still for policy, because practice what you preach is still very difficult for governments to do. They own 20% of the market in buildings, and for infrastructure even 99%, I think. So there is quite a responsibility to act on that, and to build partnerships and actually say we do it. And it's not just national governments. A lot of it is action in cities and regions, and actually also companies in the private sector. There are many sectors like the banking or finance that can take action. So that is for me a big thing to build a partnership.
But to convince authorities, the procurers, of the viability of these ideas, what do you need?
What we need is to realize that this is not a topic you can just solve in your own town. You can set one example, but we need to move beyond the example. We need to realize that this is not something just to do in Utrecht or in Singapore or just one building. No, it's a big global issue.
But you've got to talk value, you've got to talk money, you've got to have facts.
We have
and
the examples,
data.
we know the business models, it can be done. It might not be perfect, but one of the actions is start doing it more, and keep doing more and more. And then you finally come up to the big change.
Okay.
Maybe coming back to what I learned this morning from BAMB project, there are quite many things that have been done, so I'm impressed about what has been achieved, even though the presentations were quite short, so we have to study more in detail. Which are the lessons learned from the buildings that have been constructed, deconstructed, and built somewhere else also, about the indicators, about the tools. At present, we don't have any simple set of circularity indicators for buildings that could be set as objectives to procurers, to designers, to building owners, as a support of decision making. But it's the way how we have to go. And coming back to big numbers, in India, according to Ellen MacArthur Foundation's 2-year-old study, the buildings in 2030, 70% of those have not been built yet. So if it's 15, it's in other places. So the way how those buildings will be built, they will stand there for quite a long time. So I think this very urgent message to take into consideration which are the criteria, how they are procured and designed.
We tend to sort of have this ridiculous sort of insular feeling that circularity is sort of a luxury of the developed world. But how much is it an issue in other countries? How much is it a political hot potato?
But a lot of that is done already in developing countries. I think but it's handled by the informal sector, and by providing proper framework for that and also institutionalizing that, you can formalize it and you can provide jobs that are desired. At present, it's a bit not so liked job to be waste pickers, but that is like happening all the time.
So can we just talk then about, if we're talking about policymakers, at what level that we should really be honing in on? Because we had a sort of a mixed response, and you'd said that yes, it has to be local, but it has to be global as well. I mean, where do we go? I mean, Caroline, what's your thought on this? Because if it's at city level, circularity probably can be dealt with quite well, because it can be really contained, and you can get rid of waste flows, and you can have a closed system.
Well, I fully agree with the answers given before. I think it has to be dealt with at every level: the international level, European level, national level, and the local level. And the most important is actually to align these levels and to make sure that actually they are all coherent with each other. Because otherwise, if you're working on a local level, but the policies on national level or European level are not working with you, you cannot implement it. And indeed, the regional level, local level, city level is a very good level to work on, because it's small enough to enable cooperation, but big enough to have enough density, enough mass to have the flows going around. When we're talking about circular economy, it's all about circulating resources and to make sure that actually that's possible.
Also another aspect on the scale, if I may still add, like we can talk about building products or components, we can talk about circular buildings, circular neighborhoods, circular cities. And if you want to optimize it, like within one building, it may not be optimal if you don't take into account the surrounding infrastructure. So you could engage a bit larger. The same thing like with energy, it's not optimal to optimize it within one building. It's better to look at the, let's say, distributed solutions in the surrounding environment.
But are we, sorry, Caroline, you wanted to come in?
Exactly, actually. And it's also very important to look at buildings are there to support our societal needs. So it's also important to look at, when we're looking at the circular city of the future, what do we need? Which kind of activities do we need? And they will depend on the local context. In a certain city, certain activities will be more appropriate than in another. And based on these activities, well, how is the urban planning going to be done? How can you interlink these circular activities of reuse, refurbishing, recycling within the urban context, within housing, and how is this working on urban planning? That's also very important.
Kuno, if we talk about circular cities of the future, what about circular cities of the present? Are there any examples of cities that are actually getting there?
There are a couple of cities that are trying to go circular, and that will be challenged, but these are also the bigger ones, like Toronto or London. They are looking at some streams, and one of them is often the construction waste streams. I think it's not just a city again, it's also, for example, I work with Rijkswaterstaat, who work with cities. It's often a regional area where you have to distribute now between materials. So one of the new actions is to have kind of regional material banks where you do a scan and you can exchange materials in the region and know about the quality and stuff like that. So that's also something for cities, and that's something a city cannot solve by itself even. So it's always like collaboration. I think that's the major challenge here. People are so used to just work in their silos, and now they need to collaborate, and every time they need to convert it to the silos that they work in, because we're all working that structure. And how do you do that? How do you make this collaboration work and still have the silos which we have in our governments and organizations in place? And that's not just on the regional level, not city, it's also national, it's international. And that's, I think, the main challenge here at all, the collaboration.
Yes, Dirk.
And what our experience showed, how important for this collaboration and for the fact that we not know all the questions of the future, but at the same time we have to stay relevant in the future, in the context of the future, how important evidence is. And collecting this evidence brings and fosters this collaboration, and at the same time makes it transparent who is advancing and who's not advancing. And here's, I think, the biggest area of work ahead for circularity, to improve the evidence base, to find the right indicators, as it was mentioned before, and to exchange this information. For us in the tourism sector, we have learned a big lesson. Until only recently, we were very much a sector which had only economic evidence, which was collected in administrative areas, and where we had the problem of connecting that differently, especially with environmental information, to make that timely available. And here we learned the lesson how important non-traditional data, georeferenced information is to produce evidence, but also, very important, to produce participation of the local stakeholders in the desired development of their places. And another acronym over there is PPGIS, so that we, based on this kind of information, trigger participatory processes. Because in the end, if you build a building for a long time, you are actually creating the future of this place, and are the people aware of that this and that is then later on impacting on their future life? We know in tourism very often not, because they are not investing sufficient time in these participatory processes. Creating that based on evidence and then the scenarios is something which brings us together and fosters then the cooperation, the desired cooperation across all the different levels.
I think that's really something that is more general, not only to tourism, and for construction it's for sure needed too. When you look, for example, at a regional plan for circular economy here in Brussels, well, we have been defining together with all the stakeholders what is the circular built environment in Brussels, what are the characteristics, and what are the objectives that we are going to put ourselves, taking into account all the stakeholders from the sector so that actually they can express their needs, their vision, and they will also take it at heart and bring it up. And in the different actions that they're going to do afterwards, well, they're going to be much more involved in the development of the actions and the implementation than if something is just pushed up from above and they don't know why.
In the earlier BAMB session, there was a question whether an office building has 10,000 components or more. Similar question could be asked also for the design or, let's say, delivery team of an office building, starting from the city planners and covering the whole value chain, which is actually quite fragmented and quite often put together specifically for each case. They are not continuous, let's say, supply chains like in automotive industry or aerospace. It's very important that if the material manufacturer is developing circular products, how that can be then marketed across the value chain. It's very, very challenging. And a bit picking from the questions that are there, what I was maybe not seeing so much emphasized so far by digitalization. But still office buildings, maybe 60% of the time they are empty, they are vacant. We have a lot of spaces that are not in use. And how could we increase the efficiency of the space that is already existing? And I think in countries where, like in the developing countries where you build a lot more now, how could they be more efficiently used?
But talking about efficiency of space, there was a question came up about Airbnb actually, sort of suggesting that I think we've lost it now, but there we go. It started out as a way to share and optimize building assets, but of course the problems, restrictions now being put in place. How do we do this better in tourist hotspots? You know, if we're trying to maximize building use, that was supposedly one way to do it.
I assume the question is for me, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Well, it's a very, very hot question and debated very sometimes constructively and sometimes emotionally. Let's put it like that. It depends always in the context where Airbnb takes place and what are the limiting framework conditions. And for that, you have to collect timely information. And the thing is that this development happened faster than most local governments or national governments were able to adjust their legislation. So what we saw in the end were developments which were not desired, meaning that neighborhoods, the rents in neighborhoods increased, or at least people perceived that that happened, that the infrastructure over there changed. And once there are perceptions, then the discussion is very emotional. So one important step was to improve the understanding what is actually happening here. Are taxes paid? Are the normal norms, building norms, safety norms, are they complied with? Is this form of a new model of new tourism experience? Is this form right now impacting on local livelihoods? And what I mentioned before, PPGIS, is this a desired form? We can imagine certain areas in all the countries where we are residing in Spain. There are rural areas where you would be extremely happy that there are plenty of Airbnbs because there is nobody who would invest into hotel infrastructure at the initial stage. We see that in many countries where there is the need for the locals to participate. There is a wish for others to interact with them. It's a fantastic platform over there to establish there the contacts and the experiences. And I just wish to remind you, Airbnb Plus is a completely different further development of exchange of experiences, no longer just infrastructure which is provided. It's how can I get into touch with somebody who has a local experience? But what we know is that these developments through digitalization right now are extremely fast, that legislation traditionally takes longer. Once there is legislation, it's for a very long time. So we are experiencing right now in this new phase of digitalization at the speed we never had seen in history before changes. And what we need is to discuss them based on evidence objectively, and then we have a ground for building further satisfaction.
Thank you. Was it Kuna, was it you that mentioned the material banks? You said the challenges in creating
I think many people
bank.
mentioned material banks already today.
But it says
I think in general, it's very important for projects right now to, in infrastructure we're starting now with like local scans of the area. What kind of materials will come free that you can actually use, and preferably we would like to use these materials in the construction itself, so the designers should already be aware of what kind of things are coming free. And on the other hand, in the construction, you will have surplus of what you actually are working with, and where you use that, and how do you qualify that? So that's a very important issue.
I don't know if you've seen this question, Caroline, but there's a...
It's very hard to read. I mean, you sit down here.
The challenges in creating a material bank, was there a specific material that was hard to record its properties, characteristics in a material bank?
Yeah, I didn't say it was easy. It's very hard.
Yeah.
All of the standards, and that's again, it's a mind shift. All of the standards right now are based on new products. So everything needs to be shifting. Okay, what kind of CE standards, what kind of quality standards do we have? How do you get proof? Do you have guarantee? How do you test the quality? It's a whole new area we need to develop. And that will be made, yeah, probably more expensive.
I think that with regard to buildings as material banks, well, the important thing is how they've been designed. And I think we've been talking about that this morning, the different aspects of how you design, how also you have the information on the different materials that are there in order to know what their value is. And one of the things that we've been discussing this morning briefly is the business models and the value. And it's true that it's really difficult to predict the value of materials in the future, but one of the ways to actually give value to these materials is to have the producers or the manufacturers remaining the owners, because they know their products, they know how they have been installed, and they know also how they have been maintained. So when you combine that, for example, with material passports, and you know how they have been used, what has been happening with the materials or the products within the building, well, the manufacturer knows how he can retrieve it and how actually he can reuse, remanufacture, and resell it or re-implement it in a new building. So this shift towards different business models is really important if we want to create also that vision and that concept of material
But isn't that one of the hardest aspects and one of the probably quite the most frightening aspects for many people, because it seems so complex, and because there are so many permutations of business models. How will that ever be settled and decided upon, and how can that be
I don't think there is one business model that works for all. We've seen it a couple of times. Every building is different, every product is different, the context can be different. So there are different types of business models that can be developed depending on the stakeholder. And I don't think that we will find a one-fits-all model. But the important thing is indeed to just do, construct, try, and we will learn every time based on the tools that we have already now. We can improve them in the future, and we will be able to learn even more.
Dirk.
When we speak about business models, and before there was a presentation about doing the stamp back and then producing from over there the vision, I make a bold statement, and with this bold statement you will understand what the future business models could be. I do strongly believe that sustainability will become the unique selling position, a competitive advantage of the future. And I'll give you one of the reasons behind, because it's the authenticity we are transporting through that. If we are designing in different forms, it's challenging the creativity, and in the end, most people, with most products they have at hand, they are satisfied. They are highly developed. The basic needs are settled. What people are looking for are the extraordinary experiences more and more. And when we start discussing that in the developed world, there we see a high level of basic needs satisfied. But what people are looking for is this uniqueness, this difference. And what better to use materials, to use that as stories and to build them around, look, these bricks over here have had this and that story. When I saw before the story being told here by one of the other presenters, it reminded me of when I traveled through Spain. I saw a gentleman who was reconstructing in a different place a building which was to be torn down. It was one of the railway station buildings. He numbered the bricks. He was building that same building as his new house. Because he wanted to just recycle the bricks. He wanted to recycle the story, and he did so. And when you just let imagination combine that possibility, you see what stories you can build in the future, and you are thinking behind. I just wanted to add that to the new business models.
Yeah, no, nice story. But on the same, somebody was about to applaud you there. How do we combine the lifespan of buildings with the average lifespan of businesses and business models? Interesting idea, isn't this? I mean, the idea that, buildings are here for a long time. The time spans are very different and very complex.
And it also depends of the type of element we're talking about in the building, because depending the skin of a building will have a different lifespan than the inner walls or the partitioning or the structure. And it's true that the difficulty with buildings is that actually they have a really long lifespan. But there are different possibilities there. For example, in the Netherlands, the Association of Facade Systems have been developing a grouping where actually now they're leasing facade elements. So they have been investigating what are the legal aspects related to that, and the fact that actually it's not one facade manufacturing, but it's a grouping. Well, actually the liability is shared, and if someone of the producers would go bankrupt, there is still a whole group that can take over. So it's a different way of looking at things, not on an individual basis, but in collaboration, which can solve the issue at that level.
Without a Slido, I'm going to ask you all a question, just you, my 4 panelists here, but a similar sort of thing as if it were on Slido, but just really, if there's just one thing, this is just to conclude really, if there was one thing that we need to get right to push this whole idea of circularity in the built environment, what is it? Is it getting the right policy? Is it changing mindsets? Is it sort of sorting out data? I know there are lots of things that have to be changed to get it right, but if you had to prioritize, if you're able to. Pekka, could I just start with you?
Well, my answer to that would be that there's a lot of development going on, international agreements, national policies, tool development, etc. But what we can do today without any waiting, we have a lot of information and we have the knowledge, so we can start it today without waiting for anything else. So
Okay.
The principles are known, the basic concept is there.
So don't wait, act, okay?
Rather today than tomorrow.
Fine. Caroline?
Yeah, I would say it's really changing the mindset of all the different stakeholders, because technically it's feasible, we can do it. We just have to look at buildings in a different way, look at the design in a different way, how we implement it, how we use them, and this is a mindset shift.
Thank you.
I think what we experience now is that we are in a phase of change, and what we need to recognize is that on the ground, practitioners have solutions. They know the solutions, they work on solutions. We need to collaborate more on the practitioners level. Policy needs to recognize that there are so many people who can start tomorrow. So no matter how important these discussions are here, we need to start collaborating practically in regions and scale that. We've been doing that with a Green Deal in the Netherlands, whatever you call it. It's just putting people in practice together. They talk to each other, they have the same issues. And there you can actually see, you can develop these schemes overnight almost. It's not that difficult, even without the tools. Of course, these need to be built as well. So that's for me right now, start working more in practice and don't wait for policy to happen, because that might take a couple of more years.
Yeah. Dirk?
Well, besides the point we mentioned, we have analyzed for our own interest sustainability initiatives, which everybody refers to nowadays as, look, this is a best practice, and we asked these best practices some of the elements which were crucial for the generic success of them, because once they are there, others try to copy them and usually copy the creative part of that. And what I could add here from what we learned from that was there's a very strong need of internal communication. We see that happening, this is clear, but when I combine what we haven't spoken about that with this experience from the past, it was the external communication. Very often when I'm talking about circularity, people tell me, give me the entry point. I don't understand. What is new about that? And there is this tendency of business as usual. And I think that our external communication and making the case, it's working. And because of that, it is working. This direct felt experience is crucial. And there we need a bit more clever marketing on those cases. But on the substance, I think we gave many arguments before what is crucial for the success.
Well, thank you very much. 4 very clear answers to the way forward. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we're going to break for coffee now before we then go into our, the breakout sessions. And as I said before, you can choose whichever you want to go to in terms of the sessions. So coffee will be out there. And we'll be back here for the final session at 4 o'clock. Thank you. Yeah, I said. Just to remind you that there will be guides who will take you to your session rooms, so you will be able to see where to go.